Welcome everyone to Happy Hour, a program that is co-sponsored by DNR Greenway Land Trust. I'm Linda Mead, DNR Greenway's president and CEO, and we are co-sponsoring this with the Garden State Watercolor Society, who has been a wonderful partner with us for many years. And if you have not yet seen the exhibit that's here at the Johnson Education Center at One Preservation Place in Princeton, please come and see the exhibit. It's spectacular. Both the installation in our lobby, Going, Gone, and the exhibit that is all about migration that you're going to hear much more about today. And our third partner today is Conserve Wildlife Foundation of New Jersey, which has been a partner with DNR Greenway for quite some time. And we have really ramped up that partnership, and we're doing inventory work together on some of our properties now. And you're going to hear more about that today. So while we're on this Zoom happy hour, and I hope you all have something to drink next to you, I've got my bottle of Nantucket Nectars, but some of you maybe have a nice glass of wine or a beer or an iced tea, and we're going to just enjoy the next hour together. So if you would make sure that you've turned off your audio, put that on mute so we don't have any background noise during presentations. And also just keep your video off. We are recording, and this will be available to take a look at later. So we want to just get the best possible recording that we can. What we're going to talk about today is migration. And we're going to talk about wildlife and how wildlife migrates. And I mentioned that Conserve Wildlife Foundation of New Jersey has been a wonderful partner with DNR Greenway. And I want to tell you a little bit about a property that Sherry Turgrath is going to be speaking to us about today. And that's DNR Greenway's Hillside Farm property, which is formerly the Betty Wall Johnson property in Hopewell. I'm going to share my screen, if I may. And
I think I have to stop.
If you want to stop that share screen, and then I can do mine.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Hopefully everyone can see this map. Yes, Tess is saying
yes.
So DNR Greenway had the very fortunate opportunity to receive a gift of the Betty Wall Johnson property in Hopewell on December 30th, 2021. So we've owned it for just a little, close to a year and a half now. And this whole green property that you see in the center is marked Betty Wall Johnson Hillside Farm. Many of you from the community probably knew of, if not knew directly, Betty Wall Johnson, the wonderful philanthropist. What you may not know is that she loved the land and she loved land preservation. And so over 40 years, she built her home, the footprint of a home that was here. And she assembled all these various parcels. These are all different parcels of land, and all together, all these parcels that make up Hillside Farm are close to 800 acres. And to give it in context, right here, you see Hopewell Borough. So all these houses that you see here that make up Hopewell Borough, if you take a look at Hillside Farm, you could put Hopewell Borough at least 3 times into Hillside Farm. So it just gives you a sense of how much development might have been able to occur on that property. Fortunately, it didn't, and it won't, because it's forever preserved. The thing that makes this so spectacular is, think of this almost like the hole in the donut. So if this had not been preserved, it would have been the hole in the donut. But now we filled that in, and it connects with the donut all around it, which is DNR Greenway's Cedar Ridge Preserve on the west side, and on the north end are Sourland's Ecosystem Preserve. So all this green you see on the map is permanently preserved land. The green on the east side, this is all conservation easements on a number of properties that connect through here. And there is a trail through some of these properties. And then on the opposite side of Hopewell Borough is St. Michael's Farm Preserve. And hopefully you know that. If you haven't been there, there's a sculpture by J. Seward Johnson Jr. that was just placed there, and that is called The Awakening. And I invite you, it's free and open to the public. Princeton Avenue has a small parking area that's owned by DNR Greenway. You can go and park there and walk through a mowed path in the field and explore this giant sculpture. One of the things about DNR Greenway that I think makes us unique as a land trust organization is that connection of the art and the environment. And it's something that is core to who we are. We find that people that look at the landscape in an artistic way also care about preserving and protecting that landscape. And so we are very fortunate that we've been able to preserve all these lands and utilize those lands for people to walk and connect with nature. Over 33 years, DNR Greenway has preserved 22,000 acres of land, and our mission is to preserve and care for the land and inspire a conservation ethic. So when we received this gift of Hillside Farm, almost 800 acres, you take a look at something like that and you say, what do we do with it? Well, the first thing you do is you find out what you have. And so we were very fortunate to have this relationship with Conserve Wildlife Foundation of New Jersey. And through their biologists, as well as some of the birders from Washington Crossing Audubon, we have had people that have been given permission to go out on this 800 acres and inventory it to let us know what types of wildlife, what types of birds are on this property or migrating through this property. And through that process, we have found some fascinating things, and we have also utilized that information to inform how we manage the property. So that's really what it's all about. What do you have? And then how do you use that information to do the right thing in terms of the environment and conservation, as well as community? On that note, before I introduce Sherry, I would just say that we will soon be publishing some guided walk dates. The property is not yet open to the public, although Cedar Ridge is, as Sourland's Ecosystem Preserve is. But we will be publishing later this summer some walk dates, and that would be with a naturalist to come out and get an opportunity to really take a look at what we have there. In the meantime, we just ask people to be respectful because we're protecting wildlife and birds as we plan for public trails that will open hopefully next year. So in the meantime, I think what's most important here today is to hear from Sherry. She is a biologist who has been with Conserve Wildlife Foundation, working with them directly for the last 2 years, but started in the field as a botanist, as a wildlife conservationist and ecologist 5 years ago, since 2018, 6 years ago. She's been doing this work and really understanding kind of boots on the ground. What is it that's in the field? What is she looking at? And then how does she convey that information? So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to, at this point, introduce Sherry Turgrath, who is a graduate of Rutgers University. She and I both went to Rutgers, New Jersey State University. And she's going to tell us a little bit about what she has seen on the Hillside Farm property.
Let me share my screen. And the PowerPoint's up.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Okay, so I was already introduced, but my name is Sherry Turgrath. I am a staff biologist with Conserve Wildlife Foundation, and I do a lot of bird surveys. Primarily, most of my bird surveys have been on DNR sites lately, and it's been amazing. I really enjoy it. I feel like I've learned a lot. I've got to see a lot of really wonderful species, some I've never seen before. And in this presentation, I'm going to relate the migration tactics of some of these species that I've seen on site, and just talk about why the birds migrate a certain way or why they don't migrate. I'm gonna get started. So you already had an introduction about Hillside. I'm just gonna reiterate on that. It's an 800-acre historic farm property. It's in Hopewell. It was once owned by Betty Wald Johnson. and was sold to DNR, and now it's being managed for natural resource protection, and it's a really gorgeous property, beautiful architecture on the site. Once it's open to the public, it's going to be a treasure in our state to go visit. I really suggest that people check it out when it's open to the public. Around 400 acres of the site are woodlands and riparian forests and wetlands. So there's a lot of very valuable habitat on hillside that this provides homes for tons of wildlife, from birds to mammals. There's vernal pools on site that support amphibian reproduction. There's lots of box turtles on site in the fields. It's really amazing to have all this habitat surrounded by small roads in the middle of Hopewell. And what's really extra important about this site is its location next to the Sourlands. It's adjacent to the Sourlands, which is the largest unfragmented forest system in New Jersey. And Hillside is also unfragmented forest, which means that it doesn't have roads going through it or development, which is really important to wildlife, because when they have to cross roads or go through developed areas or urban areas, they're more likely to get hit by cars or to suffer disturbances from human activity or pets, being killed by pets, being chased by pets. So it just makes it easier for them to get food, to find mates, to get from one location to another. So, and it also provides cleaner water sources in the wetlands I mentioned, and the tributaries that run through the site provide nice, fresh, clean water that's not tainted by runoff from roads. And something beautiful about unfragmented forests is that they usually contain a lot of old growth. And old growth is responsible for a lot of the filtering of greenhouse gases on our planet. So they filter something like the oldest trees in the world filter something like 80% of the greenhouse gases on Earth. So we want to keep these old trees around, these large old trees, because they're really valuable to our planet. So the bird surveys that we've conducted on site, they've been conducted by Conserve Wildlife Foundation, myself, and a lot of them have been done by Washington Crossing Audubon Society. I've gone out with them a couple times. They're super educated women that know exactly what they're doing. They've been doing it for a long time, and they taught me a lot. We, both of us, do auditory and visual identification. We'll go out in the woods, we'll listen for birds, we'll hear activity, and then we'll visually identify them. Or if we know their call, that's easy enough to say that's a bluebird, that's a catbird. We've also done callback surveys, which are for raptors. You play during their breeding season, you play a variety of bird calls, and then you see if you get a response from any of these hawks on site. There are red-shouldered hawks on site, which are state endangered. And then we've also performed passive acoustic monitoring for owls, because owls call at night. We don't really want to be on site late at night. It's not easy to navigate at night. So we set up acoustic detectors to pick up owl calls, and then later on identify the type of owls that are on site. And we do these surveys seasonally, so we get a better idea of what species are on site throughout the year, because you have different species on site during the colder months versus the warmer months, which is, typical of migration. We want to help them create an inventory and help DNR create an inventory of the site, wildlife on the site. That way they're better able to manage the site depending on how the wildlife are utilizing the resources and the different habitats on site. For example, last year, Washington Crossing Audubon Society identified nesting bobolinks on site. Bobolinks are protected. They found their nest, they hatched chicks. And because the bobolinks were nesting, they suggested some field management practice changes where the fields on the south end of the site were no longer mowed at a certain time of the year, because when the mowing happens, it disturbs the grassland nesting birds. It could destroy nests, it could make them leave the site and go somewhere else. So to prevent that, the mowing was postponed to a later date to allow the bobolinks to lay their eggs, hatch their chicks, raise them, they fledged, and then business as usual for management of the fields. And that way we make sure that people are happy, wildlife is able to propagate, and the site stays wild and valuable. Very important. So next we're going to talk about bird migration. So this presentation is a combination of art and science about the migration of different wildlife. Because I do a lot of bird surveys, my presentation is going to be on why birds migrate and talking about the different migration tactics. So birds migrate primarily for food availability. When there's a change of the season, you usually have a change of available invertebrates or seeds, grasses, so on and so forth. So some species will alter their diet depending on the time of year, and others will have to move to go somewhere else to find food to sustain their diet. So if food is low in the breeding territory of one species during the colder months, they're forced to travel south. And if they didn't, then whatever is available where they breed is going to be rapidly depleted. So it's important that the species move to where they can find more food if they can't switch to something else that is available. Another reason for them to migrate is climate. So for, if you have a species that is raising chicks in the south and it's really hot and it's too harsh for the chicks to survive, they're not going to survive. So they move north where it's more tolerable weather conditions and the chicks thrive there rather than being somewhere that's too hot or too cold. Another reason is dispersal and avoiding disease and overcrowding and using up all the resources in an area. So you would think, why doesn't the species that migrates just stay where they are year round? Because it's comfortable, it's not too hot, there's food there that they eat. But if they all stayed in that area, it would get very crowded. Disease would spread with all these different species being so close to each other. There'd be a lot more competition and it would just get messy. So it's easier to disperse and go where they can survive throughout during that time of the year rather than everybody staying in one spot. So we're going to get into talking about the different species that we have on hillside that I've observed and why they do migrate or don't migrate. So first is a long-eared owl. I was with Washington Crossing Audubon Society when we saw a group of owls on site. Beautiful, amazing creatures. They were not happy about us being in their home, but it was amazing to see them. So the long-eared owl, so owls typically don't migrate. They stay in one spot. Most species stay in one spot throughout the year because they eat, mammalian prey or small reptiles and amphibians or other birds, which are typically available year round. But some species like long-eared owls are an eruptive species. So they migrate depending on the food availability at the time. So these long-eared owls that we saw on site, apparently they come back there regularly every year because it's easy for them to get food there. So wherever they come from, they could stay there, but it might be harder for them to hunt there. Maybe there's more snow, maybe, just less visibility in the winter time. The weather could be harsher. So they decide to move to hillside during the cold months for easier access to their food sources. So that's what an eruptive species is. They might not migrate every year. For example, a Canada goose will migrate every year, but an owl might only choose to migrate when the food is harder to access. Next, we're going to talk about some warblers. So first warbler I'm going to talk about is a Louisiana water thrush. They've been seen on site as well near the Black Run tributary on site. So this is a warbler that breeds in New Jersey, which means they're here in the warmer months in the spring and summer. You can see them usually doing a bobbing dance near the forested streams and creeks. So that motion is meant to kind of make prey start moving. So to kind of startle the invertebrates so they move and then they're easier to see and capture. You also see this behavior in the American woodcock. I'm sure people have seen videos of them doing their silly dance. So it's a tactic for them to find prey. These birds feed on benthic organisms. So these benthic organisms are ones that live near the bottom of a stream or river. And in the wintertime, the availability of these organisms is much lower because maybe it's too cold. They're in a more larval state at the time. There's ice that's forming on the top of the water source. It makes it harder for the birds to access the invertebrates. So instead of staying where it's more difficult to find the food that they're specific to, these benthic organisms, they move south and they'll forage in flooded fields, open areas, gardens. They'll find other ways to get food in the colder months rather than just staying where it's difficult. Another warbler looks kind of similar, but this guy is in the woodlands, is the ovenbird. So you will probably you'll hear them before you see them, that's for sure. They're one of the louder birds in the forest. They have this teacher, teacher, teacher call. And they're another bird that breeds in New Jersey. So again, spring and summer, they nest on the ground and they forage on the ground as well. So they're really dependent on thick leaf litter because they want to dig through the leaf litter and the underbrush to hunt for their invertebrates that are on the ground in the drier conditions. And they usually inhabit the upland and the like moderately sloped areas of the forest versus the water thrush, which is at the lower end of the lower areas of the forest where the water is. So same with them as the water thrush, their prey source isn't as available in the wintertime because invertebrates enter a dormant state. So they don't move around as much. They're just trying to survive the winter by conserving their energy. So when there's no insects moving around, there's nothing for them to eat. So they need to migrate to where it's warmer and they can hunt for insects. They may also add some seeds to their diet in the colder months, but usually they head south and they'll forage on very abundant prey like ants. When there's one ant, there's usually a bunch. So that's a locally abundant type of food they can eat. And they're also one of the most, and felt like mentioning this, they're one of the most common patients in wildlife rehabs during the migration. They tend to be, people tend to find a lot of ovenbirds that have hit windows, collision victims. I'm not really sure why, but I just felt like mentioning that because I thought it was interesting. The last warbler I want to talk about is the yellow-rumped warbler. So this is another migratory warbler, but it's the opposite. They winter in New Jersey and they breed further north in Canada and boreal forests. So the reason that they're able to winter in New Jersey, unlike the other warblers, is because they're able to digest the waxy components of different types of berries that grow in the colder months, like bayberries and poison ivy berries and wax myrtles. So this warbler is one of only 2 warblers that is present in New Jersey during the colder months. And you'll usually see quite a bit of them, and I have seen them at Hillside. So they prefer insects, but they'll take advantage of being able to consume these berries. All right, so that's it for the warblers, and we're going to talk about nuthatches next. So another bird that you often hear before you see is the nuthatch. There's 2 types that we see in New Jersey, the white-breasted and the red-breasted nuthatch. So the white-breasted is non-migratory. They're not a migratory bird. They decide they want to stay year-round. And why do they do that? Because they're able to store their food. So they mostly eat insects during the breeding season and when it's available. So when they find them, even in the wintertime, that's what they'll choose to eat. But they're big on seeds. They're very common at cedars, at bird cedars. You'll see them a lot, and they'll store their seeds under loose bark in trees or in crevices, and they'll come back for it later. So they'll take a bunch of food, store it away, and at some point, during the colder months, they'll come back for it. They always have a good supply of food waiting for them, which is a good advantage when you're going to stay year round in the cold weather. And now we have the red-breasted nuthatch. Like the long-eared owl I mentioned earlier, they're an eruptive species. So this is a species you might only see every 2 to 4 years in New Jersey. You don't see them every single year. And it correlates with the conifer seed in their breeding territory, the availability of conifer seeds. So when the coniferous trees drop less pine cones, drop less seeds some years, these birds don't have as much to eat, so a lot of them head south into New Jersey and other states surrounding us to feed on the food that's available for them here, which I think is pretty cool. It is cool when you get to see them because you're like, well, this is a special year. And they're a really neat little bird to find. So they're only migratory sometimes versus, you know, the other birds that do it every single year. All right, another non-migratory bird, which most people are familiar with, is northern cardinal. They're bright red year-round, always visible. We see them a lot. And what's interesting about the cardinal is that they're habitat generalists. So they're a species that you can see in almost every habitat you can imagine in New Jersey. They'll be in your backyard, they'll be in the woods. You'll see them in hedgerows and at the edges of the woods. Sometimes you'll see them even in, lower grass, and they consume a wide range of available foods. So that's what a habitat generalist is. They can eat a lot of different foods and they can be seen in a lot of different habitats. And they also nest in a lot of different habitats. They might nest in a tall tree, a short tree, a bush, whatever they can. And that's what makes them so successful, is because they're not picky. They're not picking and choosing about where exactly they want to nest. So they can have a lot more babies and be a dominant species. So because of the popularization of bird feeders and seeders, their foraging success is increased a lot. They don't need to migrate because they're not picky and there's so much food for them to eat. They eat insects, they eat seeds, they eat berries, grasses. They'll eat like grains from farms. They'll always find something to eat. And if you don't need to migrate, why would you? Because it's more stressful if you're a migratory bird. You have to spend all this energy every year flying somewhere, twice a year. And I know personally, I don't like going to the airport if I don't have to. So, so now we're getting into a couple sparrows I wanted to talk about. Two types of migratory sparrows. So the eastern towhee is another bird that breeds in New Jersey. They're popular to hear them in the woods during the spring and summertime. Another loud bird, you hear them say, drink your tea. So if you hear that sound, you know it's a towhee. They're a larger sparrow, and they also, like the ovenbird, they prefer the dense shrubby undergrowth of the forest, which hillside has a lot of this dense shrubby understory. And you usually don't see them. I usually just hear them. Sometimes I'll hear, rustling on the ground. I'll look through and I'll see a towhee, and it's always exciting because they're a pretty little bird. They nest on or near the ground. Sometimes they'll nest in the tangles or on a very low bush, but they're usually ground nesters. And they migrate during the breeding season from, they're found in most of the country. There's a different species called the spotted towhee out west. But for most of the year, they're year-round residents in the southeast half of the country. And again, why would you want to migrate if that's pretty comfortable down there? It's, it's warm, it's comfortable, there's lots of food. But because there's so many of them there in the colder months, they have to migrate north to spread out for less competition and more food availability. If everybody stayed in one spot, all those resources would get depleted really quickly. And they're also generally not a sociable species during the breeding season. Pairs tend to isolate and not really want to be near each other, territorial. So again, too many birds in one area, you're going to have a lot of fights, and they don't want that. They want to spread out, take up more room when it's available. And then in the wintertime, they're more sociable. You'll see them in groups in the southern half of the country. And the last bird I want to talk about is another sparrow. It's called the dark-eyed junco. So this is one of the most common birds you'll see across the country. They're found pretty much in every state and Canada, every state except Hawaii. And there's different variations of them. So the ones that you see in the Western mountains, or the the Southwest are going to look different from the juncos that we have, different colors and different, patterns on their body, but they're all the same dark-eyed junco. There's just many different subspecies. So we don't see them in the warmer months in New Jersey because they migrate north to breed. But in the wintertime, we see them, they come to New Jersey for the colder months. And, which is the opposite of the towhee. And what's interesting about the junco is that more females migrate south than the males do. And that has to do with female to male competition. So the males of the junco are pretty dominant, and they'll pick on the females and they'll kind of force them to eat less. They'll eat more of the food, and the females are like, we don't want none of this. So they just head south. And that way they have more availability of the food. So most of the juncos you see in New Jersey during the wintertime and, colder months are female. The males have to deal with harsher weather, rougher weather conditions because they stay north. And they're ground foragers. Most of their diet, up to 75% of their diet, is seed. So they're another bird that benefits from feeders and seeders. They mostly eat seed in the colder months, but during the warmer months, they're about half seed, half insects. So you put a feeder out in the colder months, you're definitely going to see these guys along with the cardinals and the nuthatches. You'll probably see these guys on the ground, though. They like to pick up what everybody else has dropped. So that's all the birds I have to talk about. But I can also mention how you can help them. So during migration, which occurs in the two big migrations are the fall and the springtime. You'll see if you go to, let's say, Cape May and just watch offshore, you'll see tons of birds flying through in both the spring and the fall. But there's also a lot of birds that migrate, over the continent. And we're doing our best to help them because a lot of them hit windows or they have to land to refuel. And something you can do is put out feeders during these times of years or year round. The feeders and the seeders help the birds regain their energy. It's good for the people to be able to see these birds from a safe distance. You can get your camera out, take pictures of them. And many species will benefit from the use of feeders. Just to make sure that you clean your feeders regularly and change the seed. It can grow mold in there, and we don't want these birds getting sick. And also to use appropriate seed for the species that in the area that you live in. If you have a seed that's specific to Northeast birds, that's perfect. If you have one that's specific to Mexican birds, it's not going to work here. We're not going to get the same species eating that. If you have a lot of windows in your home or on your building, your work building, see if you can paste some decals or stickers on the window that make it more visible to birds. A lot of the times they hit the windows because their perception isn't like ours and they can't see it. To them, it just looks like more sky is being reflected. The sky is being reflected. So that's what they think they're flying into, more sky. Keep your cats indoors. If you have outdoor cats, try to turn them into indoor cats. Cats have caused, the extinction of tons of different species of birds and reptiles, amphibians, mammals. I think they're more directly responsible for extinction of different species than we are, directly, that is. So bring your cats in, it's healthier for them as well. And the other thing you could do during the migrations is turn off non-essential lights at night. So especially for large buildings, if you could turn off the lights at night, it helps the birds navigate better because there's not lights confusing them and blinding them. So that's it for my presentation. I'm going to check if there's any questions in the chat. I wanted to mention, I forgot, if you have any questions, put them in the chat. It's at the bottom of your screen. It should say chat and you could type them in there and then I'll answer them one by one depending on the order.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to have too much time for questions. We're running a little bit late, but you'll see if you have anything in the chat.
Yeah, I don't see it. I didn't see anything now, but we can just. What was that?
Maybe move along. Is there one?
Okay. No, nothing yet, but we can move along, and then if people have.
Okay, and at the end, burning questions about the birds, that would be fine. I want to say hello. My name's Tess Fields, and I'm the president of Garden State Watercolor Society. I wanted to first thank Linda and DNR for having us. Again, it's always exciting to collaborate with you and support your incredibly important mission. And we're so happy to partner with the Wildlife Foundation during this Zoom. And we're gonna have another one after this in June. So I really enjoyed the presentation Sherry just did. That was great. Linda mentioned that we have an exhibition hung at the Johnson Education Center. It's our 53rd annual juried exhibition, and there is a theme to it. The theme is migration, movement for survival. So when Linda and I discussed and decided on the theme for the exhibition, I thought it could be challenging for some of our artists and maybe outside their comfort zone. But I had confidence that in the end, they would create artwork that would approach the theme from new and interesting perspectives. So tonight, we've chosen 3 artists to highlight that illustrate different approaches and different techniques to create paintings about migration. We're going to hear from Kristen Birdsey, Zena Human, and Judy Hummer. We'll be hearing a little bit about their backgrounds and how they approach their paintings, and we'll have time for a few chat questions afterwards. So let's first hear from Kristen, who painted It's Time for School. This lovely painting won the Best in Show award, and Kristen used quiet, realistic style to create a painting, but it has as you'll hear, very deep local roots. So Kristen, take it away.
Hi, I'm Kristen. I went to Moore College of Art and Design for illustration, and I've been working at Jerry's Artorama in Lawrenceville for about 12 years now. And through the store, I found a lot of good opportunities in terms of shows and artist groups to join, and I really enjoy being a part of the local art community. Tess was actually the one who pushed me to make something for this show. She kind of knew that I was in a rut with my artwork, and I've had a hard time finding inspiration for a new painting. And then when she told me about the show and the theme of migration, I was pretty excited because I grew up in Titusville next to the canal and the Delaware River. So migration was kind of a big part of where I lived. And one of the better known migrations in my area was the Shad Run, which has a festival in Lambertville every April for as long as I can remember. So rather than doing another painting of birds like I usually do, or something from the beach, which would have worked too, I thought I'd try out painting some shad, which they migrate from the ocean upriver to spawn, and they migrate in really large numbers. So they are a really good food source for a lot of animals and people along their spawn route. And for the painting, I wanted to kind of play with the idea that the shad migration was just beginning, and this is like the very first school of fish coming up the river. And I used a lot of natural granulating pigments so that it kind of felt like you were viewing this underwater, under moving water with like a kind of murky, rocky bottom. And then the painting in person has a little bit of shimmer with metallic watercolors because shad are really shiny if you ever see them underwater. So this was a lot of fun to do something different and larger than I usually do. And I just want to thank everybody and Tess for pushing me to kind of get my rear in gear and do something. So thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I know you're very busy managing the store, and just some people need additional push, and I was glad to do it. And I love the painting. And it's also framed beautifully, I have to say. But so when people come and see it, you'll see the frame as well. Okay, thank you, Kristen. Okay, now we're going to hear from Zena Human. She created a painting that is really a magical interpretation of the theme. The painting is called Voyager. And while Zena's painting has a surreal feel to it, it has very firm roots and family history and a deep connection to nature. So Zena, hi.
Hi.
One of our favorite artists that we see all the time, but why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your painting?
Okay. Well, thank you, Tess. The first thing I wanted to say is that I'm delighted to be included in this show. And my background is in illustration, and I studied at Parsons School of Design in New York. And I've worked in many venues, mainly focusing in illustration and surface design. So I applied to some of those elements like patterns, etc., from my career illustrations, you know. And when I first found out about the theme of the show being migration, I started doing some sketches, and I'm a doodler. So I sit down and I just start doodling, and I have one of the sketches here. And again, it is really rough. And this is what I kind of I needed to do this, especially because I wanted to work horizontally. And again, it's really rough, but it was the beginning of something kind of gelling with the painting. And as I said, when I just found out about the show, I just started doing the word migration, and I kind of toyed with the idea of developing that. But then my brain went to a memory when I was raising my two girls on a farm in Hunterdon County. And in the fall, we'd all be out in the field. You know, the girls would be running around, and we would notice what we called seed fairies, those pods exploding, all these little seed fairies all around us, and they were so beautiful and magical. And that's why I wanted to capture. I wanted to capture that memory in my painting. And working horizontally really helped me to emphasize the movement of the seed fairies from one location to the other. So I started painting very loosely, wet into wet, with a lot of linear glazing to show direction of undercurrents, et cetera, et cetera. And as far as influences, my influences, for many years have been botanical illustrations, which I'm always fascinated with. And throughout the years, I've done my own studies of flowers, and at times I just want to do something simple, and I get into the weeds and into all the details, which are so marvelous. And the seed pods are they're like little creatures from outer space, but they're on our beautiful earth here. So
Okay, hold on 1 second.
Okay.
I just got a note that some people are seeing Sherry's screen and not Zena's painting.
Okay.
So I don't know, Judy, is there something you can do about that? So maybe we didn't even get to see.
Yeah, I don't know. I
Kirsten's
was seeing Zena's painting.
I see Zena's painting.
I see my paintings too.
Sherry's still doing the presentation.
Oh. All right. Could other people chat and tell us whether if you're seeing Zena's painting? Say
I'm seeing everything
yes.
accurately. I'm
Yeah.
seeing it.
All right. All right.
Yeah.
I don't know why it was Sue that couldn't see it. I'm not sure why that is, but anyway, so
Okay.
you were just about finishing up, I think.
I was talking about influences and about the seed pods being so weirdly wonderful, so I wanted to, especially like the big one, like on the left, I really got into that one. So, and also all the movement. And again, I said, I worked in watercolor with just a little bit of wash in some areas, for highlights. And as far as a takeaway, I would love that my painting would bring some more awareness to the beautiful phenomenon of seasonal transitions in nature. It's like it is a phenomenon, for these seeds to travel sometimes hundreds of miles, and see the dispersation being one of those phenomenons, and the effect of climate change on this phenomenon, which I'm sure is happening as we speak. So sometimes we just need to slow down and take in what's all around us, including the beautiful seed fairies in the fall. So that's it. Thank you.
you. Thank you so much. That's lovely. Linda and I did talk originally, and did think about that different plant species are migrating, particularly in response to climate change, where their environment is no longer supporting them. And the birds and these sort of dispersion techniques that plants use are all part of that. So it's lovely. And of course, the theme, movement for survival, and this painting has movement in spades. It's lovely.
Thank you.
So thank you, Zena. Okay, lastly, we're going to hear from Judy Hummer. She created a painting called In the Life of a Monarch. It's an intriguing work that considers amazing feats of migration in a very unique way. Judy, would you tell us a little bit, please?
Okay, yes, thank you for having me. I'm putting my artist hat on now rather than the facilitator. So I have to change my brain a little bit. But I want to tell you a little bit about my background. I started painting watercolor actually when I was 15 with a local artist, and continued on and off for a long time. And then in 2011, I decided I wanted to become more serious with my art. And I started taking workshops and reading books, and kept striving for more and more and challenging myself along the way. I find that watercolor is a very challenging medium, and you're always learning. You're never done. You can never know it all. And it's a great thing. It's a lifelong experience. So I really enjoy painting in watercolor. This particular piece is more of a traditional method for me. I tend to paint things a little bit more experimentally. So it was kind of fun going back to my roots and doing this in a more traditional manner for myself. But with the theme of migration, the first thing that came to my mind was the monarch butterflies. I love them, and I actually have milkweed plants in my backyard so that when they lay their eggs, the milkweeds are there for them, for the caterpillars when they hatch. So I started doing a little bit of research about the monarch butterfly, and I learned that there's an eastern monarch and a western monarch east of the Rockies. They're the ones that do the huge migration from, North America down to Mexico. And the summer monarchs, they live for about 2 to 5 weeks. And then in the early fall, there's that generation that hatches. They live for 8 to 9 months, and they're a little stronger or whatever, because they have to make that last leg of the journey of their migration down to central Mexico, winter there, and then after the winter, come back up to, North America and start the process all over again. So I thought I was really fascinated by this. And when I was looking at all the images of especially the monarchs, when they all congregated in Mexico in those trees, one on top of the other, all I saw was a sea of dots. And then those dots reminded me of a famous Japanese artist that I saw, Yayoi Kusama. We went in 2021 to see her exhibit installation at the New York Botanical Gardens. And she's very famous for her polka dot pumpkins and other polka dot things. And she also does mirrored installations. So she'll have a sea of pumpkins, but it just looks like infinity, because in the mirror, it's like it keeps going on and on forever. And that inspired me to do a migration monarch painting in that type of idea. So I had a couple different iterations and then finally came upon this one. And for me, the chrysalises, I wanted to show all the generations of the monarchs, the different chrysalis, another one, another one, another one, another one, all the way down into infinity. And then at infinity, you can't really tell where the chrysalis ends and the monarch begins until it starts coming back out again and you see the monarch starting to develop. And then I wanted to express some of that big mass conglomeration of the monarchs in Mexico to kind of show the life cycle of the monarch butterfly. And the one thing that was interesting to me, and I want you to maybe think about, is like how this is genetically programmed in them. They just automatically do this migration every year, and it's really a phenomenal feat for such a small creature. So that's a little bit about my painting.
That's great. Thank you. Yes, it's deep for sure. I love it. We have a little bit of time. So if anybody has any questions they'd like to put in the chat, either for Sherry or for our artists who did a great job sharing their approach and techniques, we could do that. And while you're typing that in, I'll talk a little bit about what is going to be happening going forward. So this exhibit is going to be up for quite a while, which I'm happy about. It allows more people to go and see it. It goes all the way until September 24th. And because it's up for such a long time, we have the opportunity to do different events. So the next event at the Johnson Education Center is our opening reception and awards presentation. The public is invited to that, and it's a great time to meet artists and to hang out and enjoy. The next event is another Zoom happy hour in June. June 22nd, once again from 5 to 6 o'clock, and also with Conserve Wildlife Foundation, but a different speaker, but about bat migration. And then we'll pick some more artists to then talk about their work on that day. Then unusually, we're going to have a series of poetry workshops that will be run by local poets, one in June and one July and August, and then certain poems will be selected, and there will be a poetry reading based on the paintings on Thursday evening, September 21st, and we'll also do some sort of gallery walk where we can describe and take people around the gallery. And then at the very end, we're going to have an artist demonstration by one of our artists, Anne Green, and then we'll close the exhibit on the 24th. So we have a lot of things coming up, and it was very exciting, and I hope a lot of people can go see it. So do we have any questions? We don't see any chats?
There are some chats. You want me to
Oh, are
read
there?
the question?
Sure.
Okay. So this is being recorded. Do you know where people can get the recording in the future?
Yes, it will be edited down a little bit and will be put on the Garden State Watercolor Society webpage. There'll be a link to it so that you can see it again or share it with someone. And that may take a week or so to happen, but it'll be there.
So for Sherry, what is the best place to find birds in Central Jersey, and also to find out their bird songs? Like, I guess, what's a good reference for people?
From Central Jersey. So usually the best place, I'm not too super familiar with Central. I mean, I live in Middletown, which is kind of right above Central Jersey. But if there's any wetlands near you, like large still bodies of water, you'll see a lot of birds there. Forest edges, you'll usually see a variety of birds. And it really, you kind of want to go somewhere that's less disturbed. So if there's any large parks that have lakes in them or ponds in them, that's usually a good place to go. I'm trying to think by me. So like I said, I live in Middletown. I like to go to Hartshorn Park. It's near the Highlands, and you could see a lot of eagles there, osprey, a variety of woodland birds, even some like wading birds closer to the water. And as far as bird calls, there's online classes you could take if you want to get better at it on your own. But if not, I suggest downloading Merlin. It's an app that you can download, and it has a song ID built into it. So you just open on your phone, press the song identification option, and then you just hold your phone out and it'll pick up all the calls around you. And it does a really good job of identifying them. I'm going to admit that I use it a lot when I'm working, because sometimes I just can't listen to everything, and it might pick up something that I didn't hear. And I'm like, oh, it picked up a field sparrow. Let me listen for that field sparrow. Oh yeah, now I can confirm. So that's a really good app for identifying songs. I can get back to you on the Central Jersey. Like I said, I more specific spots in Central Jersey might be helpful, but I just can't think off the top of my head. If there's anybody that lives in Central Jersey on this Zoom that knows, they can maybe put it in the chat.
I would just add, this is Linda Mead from DNR Greenway, and I would just add that many of DNR Greenway's preserves, which are right here in Central Jersey, are great places to go. So you can go to our website, drgreenway.org, and you'll find on there some of our premier signature preserves, like our St. Michael's Farm Preserve in Hopewell, our Woosamonset Preserve in Hopewell, Sourland's Ecosystem and Cedar Ridge Preserves. All of those are in Hopewell. Another one that is a little bit further south is in Bordentown, New Jersey, which is really only about 20 minutes here from Princeton, is our new Point Breeze Preserve. And that's a property we preserved with the state and the city of Bordentown. And just this past weekend, we opened our Discovery Center at Point Breeze. So if you go there, you can view the Abbott marshlands, you can learn all about the Delaware River watershed, and you'll find all kinds of resources. Interestingly enough, at Point Breeze in Bordentown, that was the former home of Joseph Napoleon Bonaparte, who was the older brother of Napoleon. And he had a nephew who lived there on the preserve, Charles Lucien Bonaparte. This is in the early 1800s. And he was a premier ornithologist and a friend of John James Audubon, who visited the site and sketched birds there on the site. So it's a great spot to go. And it's 15, 20 minutes from Princeton, Hopewell area, if you head down on 295. But you'll find all of that on our drgreenway.org website.
I have one more, maybe a quick question. Should we feed birds all year round? And also, how do you keep the bears out of it?
Bears, that's a good question. Bears kind of can get into everything. So I think you just probably want to hang them high enough to prevent them from being able to reach them, and don't put them near anything that they can climb and jump to knock the bird feeders down. And also know what attracts bears. So if you're putting out like suet or nectar for like nectar for hummingbirds, like that's probably going to attract bears. Maybe certain types of seed won't. Bears are generalists in what they eat, so that's hard. I don't have bears where I live, and when I lived in North Jersey, and I live closer to Newark, Bloomfield, we didn't have bears there. But there's a. Are you saying something, Tess?
No, I was just going to say that I think New Jersey DEP strongly encourages people that live in areas with bears and take their feeders in. At night, they take,
Mm.
you know, but some areas where they're prolific, you might not want to do that and not have them. Because
Mhm.
there's decent risk there, but anyway, what was that? That was a two-parter. Oh, to
Yeah.
leave them out all year round. So in places where they're not bears, it's all right. Should people be leaving them out all year round?
You can put them out year round. If you want to get more in depth with it, you know, you might want to study what types of birds are in your area, or even just observe what types of birds are visiting your feeders, and then adjust the type of seed you're putting out. So some birds, most of the birds you'll see come to feeders love sunflower seeds, and it's like like a good northern mix. And for the most part, the bird, you know, you're going to attract the same types of birds depending on the mix you put out, but always just change it regularly. So, you know, when I leave a feeder out, I usually change it every couple of days to make sure, especially if it rains too, I change it I don't want mold to grow in there. Mold will grow in seed fast. So just be diligent about watching your feeder. If you have a lot of birds, they'll probably empty it out before it gets a chance to mold. But I'm just want everybody to be conscientious about it. It's not something you just leave and just keep refilling. You have to empty all the seed out, get all the clumps out, clean it out, and then set it up again. And like Tess said, if you have bears, maybe you don't feed year round. Maybe in the colder months, it's better when the bears are less active.
Right. I agree.
Mhm.
Any more questions?
No, those were the only questions. A few people suggested some parks in Central Jersey, Mercer County Park, Plainsboro Audubon Preserve, Ken Lockwood Gorge.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yep, and
Ooh.
and Clinton along the Raritan.
I haven't heard of
Great.
any of
I-
those.
Know that.
Well, Ken Lockwood Gorge is really beautiful. All right, I think we're darn close to our hour. I don't like keeping people too long. But this was perfect. Really appreciate everybody signing on, and all the work that Sherry did, and Judy and our artists and all that. Thank you so much. And we will hopefully see everybody back on June 22nd to hear about bat migration. So I want to say good night to everybody and thank you.
You're
Thank you,
welcome.
everyone.
Night,
It was
thank
fun.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Want to stop